Hi, this is Carol Ponton with Hill and Ponton's podcast. And today I have a wonderful guest, Kerry Baker. And I also want to let you know that we're going to be spending the entire time talking about this wonderful new PACT Act that was just signed by the president. And we couldn't have anybody better with us to talk about this than Kerry Baker. Kerry Baker has spent the last 15 years of his life for free working to have this enacted. And I can't thank Kerry enough. And I think those of you out there should realize the people behind this act. John Stewart got with him and Kerry worked with him on this. And it is enlarged. It should be called the Kerry Baker Act as far as I'm concerned. But Kerry, can you tell us when you started working on this and how?
My first ever involvement with this was on the burn pit issue. I say burn pit because the act covers more than just burn pits. And that was around 2007 or 8. I was the assistant national legislative director for DAB at the time. One of our employees came back from overseas, had pictures of this burn pit. Or one of the burn pits at the time. This was Balad, I believe. And what struck me was a USO show. This was a picture of a USO show. So a bunch of soldiers and airmen sitting in bleachers, and behind them was this massive, two of them actually, massive smoke columns coming up. And, so obviously the question was, what the heck is that? It looked like somebody dropped a 10,000 pound bomb or something. It was so much smoke going up. And with it was the now infamous, most people probably forgotten about it, but the Curtis memo. It was Captain or Major Curtis was I think it was an epidemiologist or something like that over in Iraq. And he had written his commanders basically a memo saying, this is not good that we're exposing these troops to all of this. And nobody had heard about it at that point. And I was just like, oh my God, this is and
Kerry, had you been over there?
No, I was in the first Gulf War. And I got there in August 7th of 1991, right after Saddam invaded Kuwait. Stayed there to the end. Went back a couple times, but no, not after 9/11. I got out in 98, so I was not there post 9/11. No, I was in Somalia and all that, but no. So I am familiar with the area, obviously, but not these. We had our own sets of issues, not burn pits. Measured by sizes of football fields or acres.
Well, after you saw this, what did you do?
Well, I went to the press. I have a good friend of mine at the time. I'm sure she won't mind me saying her name. Kelly Kennedy was a reporter for Military Times. Her and I are still good friends to this day. She started writing stories after story. And it kind of picked up from there. I was with DAV for a little bit longer, not much longer, but I started a database of folks that were sick, that were contacting us, and I didn't get the support I expected I would.
I was going to say, did you reach out and ask for help?
I did at the time, and I expected more support. I didn't get that much support. So
you did this on your own?
Yeah, sort of. My employer knew I was doing it, but they weren't technically putting their name behind it, but they were allowing me to do it. But it was shortly after that I left DAV because VA hired me as their policy chief in compensation service, and ironically that was also the position that everything military exposure was in my lane as the policy chief in comp service. So we ended up writing the first ever policy training letter 10-01 on adjudicating claims based on these types of exposures and a few others. My staff did all the stuff on herbicide exposure, on Gulf War stuff, on MST. I mean, you name it. If it was policy for disability claims, it was on our plate.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, we wrote what I thought was a very favorable but very accurate and very detailed training guide, so to speak, on how to adjudicate these cases. But from there, I watched the whole thing kind of not get, the raters at their VA was not applying that policy like we had intended. Now, shortly after I started, Rosie Torres, and everybody in this business knows Rosie and Leroy Torres, they started Burn Pits 360, just a kind of a Facebook website at that point in time. And I worked with them, and I still work with them to this day. But I was obviously limited in what I could do as a VA employee, but I could make sure we had good policy on the issue. And so we did make sure of that. And I still, to this day, would stand behind that training letter, had VA followed it. And, and I was always of the opinion throughout these years that if VA were to follow the policy as written, we probably wouldn't be here needing these presumptions.
Right.
But they just didn't. They didn't train their examiners on what these exposures were. They didn't take it seriously. So, throughout those years, my position changed that if VA is not going to follow its policy and do these cases correctly, then Congress is going to have to step in with presumptions. In other words, if you're not going to do your job, you should be forced to do it.
So what did you do?
Well, Rosie Torres with Burn Pits 360 and Leroy, her husband, who was really affected by the burn pits, they were staunch advocates for this. And Rosie has never stopped. She's just incredible. When I left VA into the private sector, I was able to work more closely with her. And I've done that since I left VA in 2012, 13 timeframe. And her and I, worked in the background continuously when nobody else, when at least very few people other than people affected by it, were really on board. But, here in the past couple of years, though, it slowly, as we all predicted, the claims came in, people started getting cancers, respiratory issues, just like we thought they were. And because these burn pits were used in every single operating base in Iraq and Afghanistan. So this wasn't just an isolated event. And we're talking about, football field size burn pits on average, that is. The one in Balad got to 30 acres in its
Wow.
I hear a lot of people say, well, when I was in service, we used burn pits, in the 60s. What they're usually referring to are the latrine burning, 55-gallon barrels of, waste with kerosene, probably not good to breathe, but that is not what we're referring to when we say burn pits. We're talking football field size or larger burn pit that burns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you've got to man that thing, and it's producing so much smoke that goes for miles, and you might be sleeping 100 yards from it your entire deployment. So the level of toxins that you're getting over time is probably the first in there's nothing that I know of that compares to it in any conflict that we've been in. Obviously, there's Agent Orange, Vietnam. That's not good either. But these burn pits put out the exact same dioxin that was in Agent Orange as just one of the toxins of dozens of others. You burn plastic and treated wood together, you get 2378 TCDD, which is the dioxin that was in Agent Orange.
And what's amazing is for the Vietnam veterans, it seemed to take years before the exposure caused diseases, where in these people, these were young people getting horrible cancers.
Yeah, I was at the signing of the bill last week. And there was a couple of dozen widows that I know personally from the years that I worked on this that were there at the signing, and all of these widows were younger than me. Going back as far as their veteran spouses dying in early 2000, shortly after the war. And now obviously there's a lot more of them like that. So,
and later on, we have some really good news for those people. Yeah. But just John Stewart got interested in this, didn't he?
Right. So eventually, and I think they were a little too late. We could have probably done this a number of years ago, but eventually the service orgs got on board. I'm not here to knock the service org, and that was a help. But about that same time, Rosie was instrumental in getting John Stewart and John Field on as big supporters of this. Once they understood the gravity of it, it was off to the races. John Stewart's first episode when he went back on air, the problem with John Stewart was on burn pits. And it really picked up steam there. I don't think we could have done it without John Stewart.
And you worked closely with him on that, right?
Yes, we did. Very closely with him. We did numerous videos, and I mean, he was tireless on this, and that's what we needed. Somebody that was a good voice for these folks and would not sugarcoat anything, and would call out whoever was not supporting it, left, right, it didn't matter. This is not a political issue. It almost got turned into one, but at the end of the day, this passed by 86 to 11. It was 80 something to 11.
As it should.
Yeah. So very bipartisan. So yeah, a lot of work went into this, a lot of years, a lot of suffering from a lot of vets. And this is going to change the lives of just
hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And Kerry, I really want to thank you because you've done this for years with not one penny paid to you. You did it on your own time. It wasn't a disease you had. It wasn't a disease, your family had, but you did it because you knew it was the right thing to do. And I just really want to tell you how much I appreciate you because so many people are going to benefit from this. So thank you from all of us.
Well, you're welcome.
Now, if you'll tell us about the law.
Well, we'll try.
All right.
So this act does a lot of things that we're not going to get into because we got to understand this just passed. VA has just started to digest this thing. It's got a lot of things that set some things out in the future. We don't know how some of that's going to go. There's healthcare aspects to this that we're not going to get into here because we don't know how.
This is a massive bill law, and it covers so many things. And as Kerry and I were talking, it really brings more questions than answers in many areas. So Kerry's just going to talk about the basics of some part of this law so that we make sure everybody knows what's going on, the things we do know.
Yeah. So there's healthcare aspects of it. We're not going to get into because we don't specialize in the healthcare side of things, and that's going to be a while before we see how that turns out. There's research that VA has to conduct. Obviously, they haven't had a chance to start that yet. There's reports that they're going to have to owe to Congress on a regular basis. So those kind of things we don't need to get into. So what everybody's concerned with, how is it going to benefit their claim?
Right.
And which claims is it going to benefit? And just kind of a 10,000 foot view, it's going to benefit pretty much potentially all veterans that served from the first Gulf War, meaning the one I was in from starting in 1990 up to the present, who've served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and a number of other countries that will share. And that's all of these, these Gulf War type exposures. Well, when I say Gulf War for this, I mean Gulf War I, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Enduring Freedom, all of that. That's what I'm talking about. It affects folks that were exposed to herbicide agents like those used in Vietnam. It adds a few disabilities there and adds a few locations that we'll get into. It affects radiation exposed veterans, and it's a little bit hard to track that one a little bit. It affects how widows, if you have, from my reading of it, all right, and we'll have to see how this gets implemented. It seems to affect widows of all everything that's included in the bill, right? Be it herbicide agents, be it burn pits. It seems to have some provisions for surviving spouses that I think are really good. So with that said, anything else you want to add to any of that before we kind of
But one of the things I thought was amazing is it's not only the people that were in country, but if you flew over, that was amazing. Anybody in the airspace. So it is really comprehensive.
So the bill is titled the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson Honoring Our Promise to Address a Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2022, or the Honoring Our PACT Act of 2022. And if you read it, you will see in various sections or titles, I should say, there's Title 1, Title 2, Title 3, Title 4. They're comprised of other bills, all right, that were floating around Congress that all had to do with very similar. So one section might be a bill that originated with a certain name. Another section might be another bill that originated with another name. And they all now fall under the Honoring Our PACT Act of 2022. And just we'll say PACT Act for short. That's just much easier. Now, so we've got expansion of healthcare eligibility. We're not going to get into that. But it just kind of a 10,000 foot view. It does expand healthcare out a number of years for vets that may not be eligible to it now. Obviously, if you're going to get benefits based on this bill or other bills, if you're getting compensation, that shouldn't be an issue because you're already going to be entitled to healthcare at that point. But it does extend healthcare to veterans that might this day not otherwise be eligible. If they're not in the system, they're not getting benefits, their income's high. This is going to open up some room for those folks.
Kerry, is this for everybody who served over in the Gulf?
Yes.
Okay. Is it for Vietnam veterans as well, or what era?
Well, I'm not. I don't want to say it's not for Vietnam era veterans, but I'm honestly not sure about that. I'd have to go through and really pick apart the healthcare issue.
Exactly. I think it's not clear.
Yeah.
This is just another one of the areas that we don't know which way it's going to go.
Yeah. And VA's got some leeway on some of this, on how they implement it, especially on probably the healthcare side. Not so much the benefit side, a little less leeway there. So we'll just leave the healthcare side there, but it also, Title II of the bill, and you don't have to follow the titles, but it creates a new presumptive process. Now, this really isn't going to affect the issues within the bill. This is more of a future-looking, forward-looking process as VA goes forward and tries to figure out how, apart from the ones in this bill, if they're looking at a future presumption for something that may not be addressed in this bill. It lays out sort of a different framework, similar but new framework on how they go about doing that. And that's still a lot of, we're going to have to wait and see how that works out, because there's a lot of moving parts when you're talking about figuring out a new presumptive process, because the current presumptive process is a lot of moving parts. And it's different if you're talking about Vietnam vets versus Gulf War vets versus other types of vets. Everyone has sort of their own little process for determining presumptive diseases, although there may be some overlap. Vietnam and Gulf War both, for example, used IOM reports, Institute of Medicine reports, but maybe in a little bit different ways. So this doesn't stop all of that. It just creates sort of a different framework. And, you'll tear your brain out of your head if you try to figure it out yet.
But in other words, it's a living law. In other words, they're saying we're not stopping here. We know there are going to be other disabilities, and we expect you to evaluate to see whether or not they should be presumptive, which is pretty radical from the past laws that I've seen. So I'm really happy about that.
Yeah, it is. That's a very good way to put it. It's definitely a living law. And I suspect we'll be digging into this thing for years to come. There'll be litigation, and we won't agree with what VA does with some of it. We'll praise VA for other parts. Some parts they're just not going to have a choice. They're going to have to do what the law says, and the way it says. And if they don't, well, then we're going to be there to hold them accountable.
So let's start with the DIC. That's one that is so exciting to me and such an incredible benefit. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, let me get down there.
That DIC is dependent benefits. So a surviving spouse, surviving children.
So yeah, and this is we looked this with our team, and I thought, well, we need to focus on Title III, Title IV, the new presumptions and all that, but it's not. This is in Title II under the toxic exposure presumptive process, and it's at the end of that section. And if you're referring to something else, Kerry, please stop me.
No.
And it's I think it's section 102. You'll forgive me if I'm through it.
We don't need that. Just tell us what it says.
So there's outreach. That's another thing it's got to do. VA's got to do a lot of outreach for this bill. So
contact these veterans that they know should be getting these benefits, who've applied before.
Yeah, and that's good.
There's so much they need to do.
Yeah, the VA is going to be busy with this.
But we can't count on that happening.
No.
We need to let everybody know as much as we can.
Right. So this section is titled Reevaluation of Claims for DIC, or Dependency and Indemnity Compensation, involving presumptions of service connection. So that's kind of a broad statement there. And it modifies a certain part of the statute, and it's titled now Reevaluation of Dependency and Indemnity Compensation Determinations Pursuant to Changes of Presumptions of Service Connection. What does that mean? Well, it's not a very long section. I'm not going to just read it on the air here for you, but from what I can tell, this is going to be, we're going to have to follow VA closely on this, but from what I'm reading, it seems to apply to the whole bill and possibly to future changes under this bill, where if you are a surviving spouse and you have been denied benefits in the past, you can then come into VA and you have to ask for it. Now, I just had a conversation with somebody in VA central office yesterday, and they pointed this part out. So they're already looking at this.
So ask for it by filing a supplemental claim, I would expect, right?
Right. And so under the AMA, right, you would file a new 526, you file a supplemental claim because it's been denied in the past, but you have to file that claim and ask for readjudication of the old whatever benefit you were denied in the past. And in my reading of this is that's going to be retrospective if they end up granting the benefit because of this law change. Now
that is amazing, because by what he means by retrospective is benefits will go all the way back to when they originally filed that claim, which could be years. And this is very rare for the VA. The VA usually gives you benefits starting in the future. But for these widows or widowers, they have made a special exception, which is extraordinary.
Yeah, and now this was not a section that I specifically worked on. So I know what a lot of vets out there are going to ask. Well, what about fill in the blank? What about me?
Yes.
I filed 20 years ago and they denied me. Good point. All right. But the bill does not seem to reach back for veterans. Now, obviously, if you've got a claim pending, we've got tons of clients with claims that this bill is going to answer, but it's not likely going to grant those benefits retroactively. So we're going to still be fighting those claims to try to get the service connection for whatever it may be retroactively.
So the normal bill that we would see is that where benefits start in the future, they don't go back. And so for some reason, and I'm thrilled to have anything that gives veterans what more than they desire, is for these widows or widowers, they're going to get benefits all the way back if they filed. So I don't think we should feel bad about one thing, because this is extraordinary. Yeah. And the more benefits, the better.
Yeah. And now I know people are going to ask a question here as surviving spouses, and you should ask this question. And unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I can tell you what I think, but I don't know yet. So with a surviving spouse case, say your spouse died 10 years ago or 5 years, let's say 5 years ago, and they denied you DIC benefits. But let's say prior to that, your spouse was sick for 5 years and he or she had filed a claim and it had been pending for 5 years. I'm just using that for easy math. And then the veteran dies and the widow files a DIC claim 5 years ago. So you're looking at a 10-year window, the first 5 years being while the veteran was alive, the second 5 years being after the veteran died, and their surviving spouse claim. Now, I definitely read this to say it looks like the surviving spouse is going to get benefits back that last 5 years from the time of the veteran's death. That's because that's going to be the period that DIC is payable.
Right.
I am not seeing anything that specifically tells me that the widow's going to get the accrued benefit that would have been paid to the veteran. I'm not seeing something that says you don't get it.
This is just one more of the really unanswered questions we have. There's going to be years in litigation, Kerry, I think.
Yeah. So I think I can safely say, and it sounds like you might agree with me, Carol, that the surviving spouse portion, the DIC portion, this bill covers. But I'm not certain that it covers the accrued portion of that. So, and
here's another question I don't know the answer to, Kerry. Vietnam veterans, are these widows covered under there? And is it only under the two new presumptive disabilities?
There is a section on here, and I don't recall the exact part, but it does look like to me they wrote out Niemer. Now, look, I even when I was in VA, the powers that be way above me would have given anything to be able to slash Niemer to pieces.
They still feel that way.
Yeah, and you could not. I remember people wanted to. We can do it with a regulation, and because I had a serious debates with folks. No, you can't. You can't do it with a regulation because Niemer is based on the original 1987, the first bill ever, the Radiation, Dioxin Exposures Compensation Standards Act. I think that's the title. This is before the Agent Orange Act. Okay, that's what Niemer is based on, and you could not do away with it with a regulation.
Right.
You could do away with it with another with a court case. In many respects, Congress could not do away with it by just passing a law saying VA does no longer have to follow Niemer.
Right.
This is different. Okay, and they may have effectively killed Niemer, but for the purposes of this bill, they did put some language in there that does seem to make it sound like Niemer is not going to apply for and this is Niemer 1. Niemer would only apply to Vietnam veterans. Okay, when we get there, this adds Thailand and American Samoa and Guam. Niemer would not apply to those folks anyway.
Right. Okay?
Niemer is only Vietnam veterans.
So here's the question, Kerry, that I look at this and I say, okay, hypertension is going to be presumptive. I think it's 20, but not until 2026, except for, and then they go homeless veterans, terminal veterans, but is for DIC, it would seem that it's effective right now for widows. So to me, that means there are so many diseases hypertension could cause that would kill a veteran: heart disease, chronic kidney disease. Absolutely. So it seems to me all of those are open right now. and the widows need to file right now for that. Is that your reading?
Yes. I would agree with that 100%. If you're a surviving spouse out there and you've been denied DIC benefits, you need to get a supplemental claim going and ask for VA to re-adjudicate the case. Now, they're not going to do it immediately. They haven't got any regulations. I checked Westlaw yesterday. The bill has not even been put in the statute. But that's going to happen very quickly.
Kerry, do you think that could be for only these two new presumptive disabilities or for all of the presumptive disabilities? I don't know the answer to that for DIC.
You mean for the hypertension?
Right. Well, no. I'm saying so widows who have filed a claim can now go back and they could file for the hypertension or I can't say it, mono, whatever.
MGUS.
Can they also file, do you think they can now file for the other claims that have been presumptive that they were denied on years ago? Or only the two new ones?
I'm not, that's a very good question. I don't see anything in the bill that expressly explains that in clear language.
I don't either.
That opens up a second avenue for widows denied under rules that this bill doesn't cover. So let's say, well, I'm not sure if you can think of an example off the top of your head, Carol.
Cardiac disease. So they died of cardiac disease, but the widow, when they filed it, that wasn't presumptive. Later on, it has become presumptive. Could the widow file a claim and go back and get those benefits back when they were denied? Are we only limited to the two new ones for Agent Orange?
I think we're limited to the two new ones, but I mean, if you're talking about a Vietnam veteran who then had heart disease, that falls under Niemer. It typically would. There could be circumstances in the individual case that could remove it from Niemer. But I don't think this bill provides an avenue for something that's already in the law.
So only the two new ones. Two new disabilities. Okay.
I believe so. Now, having said that, it does look like if you were a Thailand veteran or Vietnam veteran or Guam,
Cambodia, Laos.
Yeah, and your surviving spouse was exposed there or served there, this is going to count for exposure. It does seem like that widow in that circumstance and all of those circumstances can go back, at least for the DIC part, for sure. But I'm not sure whether they're reading out of Niemer, which wouldn't apply to anybody but Vietnam anyway. I'm not 100% certain if Niemer is still going to apply just for Vietnam vets for those two conditions, or it's just the DIC portion of that, because Niemer cover both the accrued and the DIC. This definitely provides that widow an avenue, to seek the DIC.
And they are effective right now. And my recommendation is file right now, because there's going to be a ton of cases filed and you want to get in front of everybody. Yeah. So please, if you are a widow or widower, or one that's been denied, please let them know. A lot of people don't follow the law. They don't know the intricacies of it. And all of you have an opportunity to help other veterans or their widows or widowers. So these should be filed right away. Go ahead, Kerry. I'm sorry.
No. So I know that sounds really complicated to a lot of folks. Let's talk about Niemer and what applies and what doesn't apply. It would help that you understood Niemer, what I'm talking about, and that's hard enough to understand for people that know Niemer. But for live veterans, right, and I think I'm safe in saying this part, for live veterans who are now affected by the hypertension and the MGUS, in all caps, it does look like the bill reads out Niemer provisions for those Vietnam vets. Okay?
So what do you mean by reads out?
So normally, when VA adds a new disease to herbicide agents for Vietnam veterans. All right. Now, the new disease would apply to all veterans who are exposed to herbicides. Niemer only applies to Vietnam. So that's a very important thing you got to keep in mind here. So under the normal process prior to this bill, let's say VA, because of the IOM reports that have elevated hypertension in a relation to Agent Orange, let's say VA added this in their regulation without this bill. Okay.
Right.
Niemer would apply there, just like it's applied to all other additions to the Agent Orange list of presumptives. So there, if a veteran had been denied service connection for the hypertension 20 years ago and was still fighting, even if it's still fighting the claim or not fighting the claim, Niemer says VA now has to go back to that veteran and they have to find that veteran. The veteran is not required to come in and ask for it and re-adjudicate that original claim and pay benefits if benefits are otherwise payable back to that first claim, as long as it's not prior to September of 1986 or 85, 86. So anytime from thereafter, all right, up to the point the new conditions added, VA is going to have to pay retroactive benefits there. So that's Niemer in a nutshell, sort of.
And just so people know, Niemer was a court case.
Right.
It had nothing to do with passing laws, the Congress, the VA.
Yeah.
This was people who sued the VA for not providing service connection for the Agent Orange diseases that they got. And it is a court case that has evolved. It has had nothing to do with the VA other than what they are mandated to do by the court. And that's why it's totally separate from everything else.
Yeah. And so what Niemer requires VA in a nutshell to find all the veterans that have been denied a new condition, reach out to those veterans, re-adjudicate those original claims, pay benefits back to those original claims. Okay. So you got to think about what that involves, especially with hypertension. When they added ischemic heart disease, that was 150,000 veterans. Okay. I know I led the policy evolution of all that. For that particular Niemer run, but hypertension would be bigger. Okay.
Right.
So VA has adamantly opposed any new law that would say, look, you have to go find these 250,000 veterans that have been denied hypertension, reach out to them, find their survivors, re-adjudicate their cases. Niemer's the only thing that mandates VA do anything remotely like that. Right. So if Niemer were to apply to this, they would have to do all of that for hypertension and MGUS and all Vietnam veterans. That's what VA didn't want to do. Okay. So VA is not balking at, they might have to pay retroactive benefits, especially to the widows. It looks like it certainly covers. They don't want to have to go back and find all those vets, re-adjudicate all those. So that's the part that it looks like this bill reads out of the law. So, because it talks about notwithstanding any federal court case, yada, 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 the benefits will start from point forward. And so
the widows, the DIC widows can go back and they get benefits, but the veterans, if they file a claim now, say they're homeless and they file a claim for hypertension, the benefit starts in October of this year.
October or that's I think that's what the bill says. Now that doesn't mean you're going to get them in October. I don't think they're
right. They don't have things set up yet, but so there's a difference between what the widows will get or widowers versus what the veterans will get.
Right.
And remember go ahead and tell them about that. I think we need to talk about go ahead. We need to talk about.
We're just talking about Agent Orange stuff for this conversation, I think. But what were you going to say, Carol? So
unless you're a widow or you're homeless, terminally ill, or have severe financial hardship, though all of these two presumptions start right now. But if you don't fit into those, then you have to wait until the date they effectuate them. For instance, I think the MG, what do you call that? MGUS, which is lymphoma, pretty much, right?
Right. It's an offshoot of lymphoma somehow.
And I don't think that starts until, is it 2024? I know hypertension doesn't start till 2026.
Right. So the bill has staggered the implementation of some of these benefits. Okay. And you're right, but for widows and hardship cases, it's not staggering them. Now, having that, it's only some of the benefits that's being staggered. So now here's the rub, and that's why I'm kind of shying away from saying, yeah, if you're a hypertension affected vet, you're not going to get benefits to 2026. I don't know that. Does it say it? It says it in the bill. But here's the rub. When the president signed this, that's about 10 feet off to his left, when he signed this bill, on air.
And I heard him.
Yeah.
On air.
Said to Secretary McDonough that he is telling the Secretary of VA at that point in time that all of the cancers and all the stuff in this bill, he wants him to implement right away.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that means he's going to issue an executive order and say these staggered dates in the future, we're not going to go by that. We're going to implement it now. I don't know the answer to that. If him saying that to the nation even counts as an executive order, I don't know that either. But he did say it. Okay?
Yeah.
And
so that's what he wants. So we'll see if he's able to get that.
Yeah. So that's something that I want everybody to understand. The bill does stagger some of these benefits. I don't know if the president's statement meant to eliminate that staggering effect or if it didn't. I just don't know. And so we're going to have to wait and see. VA will, if that's the case, VA is going to put out, instructions to that, which they have not put out. I looked online yesterday on VA's intranet, which is kind of internal. They don't have instructions, public instructions to the field. I know they sent out some emails internally that we don't have access to, but I don't think they've laid out any serious policy in those emails. So I certainly hope they're not doing business that way.
And so what Kerry meant by staggering, just to be clear, is these presumptions aren't effective immediately for everyone. They are effective for widow or widowers, and I had left one out, people who are terminally ill, homeless, under extreme financial hardship, and 85 or older. I left those out. So all of those people, these presumptions are effective immediately. For other people, there are specific dates that they become effective. In other words, you can't get benefits for hypertension until 2026, and you will only get them starting, I guess, on the date that they make them effective, Kerry, in 2026?
Well, that's a good question. Do the benefits become effective at that date, or is that when they're allowed to adjudicate the cases?
It's not clear.
I think it's probably what you just said, that they'll start on that date, both adjudication and effective dates. But we just don't know that for certain yet. But going on with the Agent Orange, because I know we're getting a little late and we're going to get to the burn pit stuff. So if some big things to know, if you think you're exposed to Agent Orange, Thailand veterans is now a presumption of exposure. So
if you served on any U.S. or Royal Thai base during the period covered, you are covered. You are presumptively covered for these diseases. And
that's all Vietnam Agent Orange related diseases. The same thing goes for Laos. The same thing goes for Cambodia. The same thing goes for Guam. And somehow the same thing even goes for American Samoa.
I know. And people have been fighting for benefits in these areas for years. So this is wonderful.
Yeah, so that's a big expansion. So you've got those new areas plus hypertension and MGUS going forward. So that's a good thing for herbicide exposed veterans. Now, burn pits. When I say burn pits, I just mean let's say burn pits as a universal exposure here, because it's not technically limited to burn pits. But if you were in certain areas and you have certain diseases, now I'm talking everything from August 2nd of 1990 on, okay, not talking about Agent Orange anymore, and there's a whole list of things that is going to be presumptive for you. And and there's a pretty big list of where those locations are too. It pretty much includes all the area that was considered the Southwest Asia Theater of Operations under 3.317, which is the Gulf War regs. But it's also in the bill, and it includes the airspace above these is Bahrain, Iraq, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, United Arab Emirates. Those places right there are for everybody August 2nd, 1990 and after. Right now, for September 11th, 2001 and after, it includes Afghanistan, Djibouti, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Okay. And simply because, prior to 9/11, we really weren't in those areas. So that's a lot of places.
And once again, the airspace over it.
Right. And I'm sorry,
you would not think of.
Yeah, Yemen, Uzbekistan, and any other country determined by the secretary. Okay, so I forgot a couple there. Sorry, and as Carol said, the airspace above it, because that's and for Vietnam, you don't get the airspace above it for herbicide exposure. So that's a lot of places. Now, what are the conditions? What's going to be? Let me get down to that, and I will.
So it starts off with the date of enactment, their number that they are covering, and then it goes out each year, October 1st of 2023, they add to each one. I've got the list here if you want.
I've got it here. You mean the list of disabilities?
Well, for the date of enactment, which ones are covered right now?
Yeah, if you want to
read those? Okay. Yeah. Right now, asthma, respiratory cancer of any type, brain cancer, chronic bronchiolitis or obliterative bronchiolitis, emphysema, granulomatous disease, interstitial lung disease, pleuritis, pulmonary fibrosis, sarcoidosis, chronic rhinitis, and glioblastoma. They are covered now. The next time they're going to add would be October of 2023. Everything not described in what I just said, and then they're adding chronic bronchitis and COPD. And then in October of 2024, they add head cancer, neck cancer, gastrointestinal cancer, reproductive cancer, lymphoma cancer, lymphomatic cancer, and pancreatic cancer. Then they go on to 2025, they add kidney cancer, melanoma, and so it's staggered, as he said, when these things are covered. We are really anxious to see if President Biden is going to do away with this with his statement so that everything is covered right now. Yeah, that's something we're going to be looking at.
Yeah, he specifically said the cancers on the burn pits. Now, whether that meant the whole bill or not, I don't know, but he did say that.
And this is what you get when you have a president who feels your pain. He lost his son. And there's nothing more painful than that. So you have a president who wants veterans to get what they deserve. And this is the first time, Kerry, I remember in ages that we've had a president who had a personal involvement in this for the veterans.
Yeah, the one of them that you listed there, glioblastoma, is an almost 100% fatal brain tumor. I've had a number of clients over the years that have passed away from that.
Horrible.
All very young, and that's what his son died of not long after he got back from Iraq. So, I'm very glad to see. I'm glad to see all that. And the interesting thing here is head cancer of any type, right? Neck cancer of any type. Now, I do find it interesting. Just as a side note, you got head cancer of any type, and then separately you have glioblastoma.
That's right.
Glioblastoma is a brain cancer. I would call that a head cancer of some type, but maybe the medical field says brain and head is different, but I would not think that. So respiratory cancer of any type, neck cancer of any type, GI cancer of any type, reproductive cancer of any type, lymphoma any type, lymphatic cancer any type. That's big.
That's really big, because if you file claims, you know, the VA is very quick to say, oh, but it's not exactly this type of head cancer or this type of kidney cancer. It's another type. And so this law is awesome because it says, we're not going to hear any of that. You're covered.
And then this part that we're talking about right now is probably the part, with the exception of with the exception of Thailand. In Thailand was a different fight for me. It wasn't along the fight with burn pits. It just got into this bill. But this was the fight that I probably had for the past 15, 16 years, was everything we just listed there. And same thing, Rosie Torres. I mean, this was our fight. Okay. There's some other portions of this bill that other, you know, there was a lot of people that eventually came together and added to this bill. I can't take credit for that.
But this is a huge win.
Huge. Reasons that we fought for all those cancers like that. And this has been kind of my stick from the beginning is, you know, we know what, at least currently, what Agent Orange causes. We know more or less what exposure to, say, TCE causes. You know, for the most part, I'm sure there's things we don't know yet about some of that. You know, and you could pick almost any single toxin that these burn pits produce, these Iraq and Afghanistan veterans were exposed to, and find something that it probably caused. All right. And when you add all of that up, because we had huge spreadsheets of every toxin and every target organ, target body system. And when you look at it like that, you know, you can look at an individual exposure and go, man, that affects these 2 or 3 body systems pretty severely. But when you
and the concern, Kerry, is we don't know what the future will bring. Look at the Vietnam veterans. It was 40, 50 years sometimes for these people before their immune system was lowered so much that the embedded toxins were able to take over. We don't know what's going to happen to these poor veterans who are not old yet. Right.
And the, you know, the thing with us was once you add these up, you add all of these toxins that we know of, that people were exposed to. And I say know of because there are things that the military did not test for that we don't know of. Okay. These just talking ones that we knew about, all the chemicals that the air samples revealed from the burn pits. There was practically nothing left in the body that wasn't affected.
Right.
And so there is no research out there to include even the 9/11. 9/11 is probably the closest thing. There was no research out there that looked at that number of toxins affecting a body all at once and for long periods of time. Okay. And that's why this is so irresponsible that you know, how this was conducted in the first place. So there's, you know, that's why almost every cancer you could almost get is on that list, because that's what we fought for. It wasn't just what benzene causes or just what dioxin causes. It's, you know, here's the 20 different carcinogens that you're going to be exposed to all at once for a long period of time. And so, in my opinion, that was one of the best wins that we could get for everyone.
It was, and it is. And let's real quickly. One of the things a lot of people asked about Fort McClellan, and this law requires that there be an epidemiological study on Fort McClellan veterans who served any time from 1935 to 1999. And then they're supposed to make recommendations of that. And then, Kerry, let's talk quickly about Camp Lejeune. This also covered this is amazing, Bill. It covered Camp Lejeune.
Yeah, it allows veterans and their survivors to sue the government
in federal court.
In federal court over Camp Lejeune. Now, I don't want to claim to be an expert in that area on how those lawsuits will go because I'm not. But you know, the Posse Comitatus Act prevents veterans from suing the military. This overrides that, which is a big deal. Now it does offset it in ways that I'm concerned about. It offsets it with VA compensation. It looks like it might offset it with Social Security. I don't know the effect on a veteran who relies on Social Security or Medicare. Kerry, you might be the one.
Well, here's the concern I had. So this applies not only to the veterans, but to their spouses, their children, and in vitro. So if a woman was pregnant with a child who was later born with any of these disabilities, that child is covered. Now, they said there would be an offset of the financial benefits and the medical benefits. And we don't really know, what do they mean? How do you evaluate the medical benefits? But that would only occur or affect the veteran. It would not affect, from my reading, his spouse, his children.
Right.
I didn't see that at all. So it's only the veteran we have to worry about. And once again, it is not clear what all they mean. Do they mean all federal benefits like Social Security? Because Social Security has Medicare or Medicaid. It's really not clear. So this is another thing we're going to have to watch for. But it added so many people that for years it's been so sad, because the veteran would talk about how his wife had miscarriage after miscarriage, or their child was born with a disability. These people now can come in and file lawsuits, and they should. Now, remember that one of the things they did is they limited the place where you can file to the Eastern District Federal Court of North Carolina. So these are going to be class action suits that are going to be brought. And so these are lawsuits, and you need to figure out right now whether you want to get in them or not. These are not things that you should wait for. And Kerry, I was worried about some of these statute of limitations and talking about you had 2 years to file.
Right.
Comment on that?
Yeah. The way I read that, if you don't jump into that boat, so to speak, within 2 years, you can't get into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So please tell everybody about this. If you have a claim, get started. If you need help, we're here for you. So this is anything else you want to talk about just today, Kerry? Because we're going to go into these in more detail in the weeks to come, but we wanted to give you a broad overview of the PACT Act. Anything, Kerry, that you would add?
You mentioned Fort McClellan.
Yes.
Anybody that knows me knows that's a pet peeve of mine. But it was also not part of our push on this bill. Okay. And I still to this day, and I will forever believe that we have the facts on our side on Fort McClellan, and the law is still on our side. And this bill does not seem to affect that in an unfavorable way. The people that worked on the portions that were able to get Guam and things like that in there, if you ask me, Fort McClellan belonged there.
Yes.
Far more than those areas. Not that those areas didn't, but if you had to pick
how many people were affected,
the evidence we have for Fort McClellan outweighs all the other locations, maybe with the exception of Laos and Cambodia, because we know they sprayed herbicides out of C-123s on those locations.
But Kerry, what worries me is a lot of times it's like hypertension. The VA doesn't want to deal with all these people. If they can have a select few that are not dead now, then, they're more likely to agree on this. But Fort McClellan, think of how many people went through there in 64 years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was, the military's MP school. A lot of people went to boot camp there. The Women's Army Corps was out of there. The Chemical Corps was home there. A lot of people. But there's a lot of exposures there. The herbicide agent use there was off the charts. And I am confident that we're going to get our day in court on that, and it's going to be based on the law and the facts. And I just think that would be a very clean and good win, not political. And some of this, we had to get political on some of this or it wasn't going to happen. But I still think on the burn pit side, just because I was involved with that so much, the facts are on our side there.
Yes.
The facts are on our side in Fort McClellan. The people that worked on the herbicide aspect of this, I don't think they were up to speed on it. And I'm not knocking them. They got some things in the bill that I didn't expect you would get in the bill. I would not think Guam would have gotten in the bill, but it did. That surprised me. American Samoa, I wouldn't have thought would have got in it, and it did. So that surprised me too. I wish those folks would have been more up to speed on Fort McClellan, but that Fort McClellan is a hard one to get your head wrapped around because there's a lot of information, and most people don't want to sit down and just have their brain scrambled with quite that much information on very complicated topics.
Sounds like a new project for John Stewart.
Maybe, maybe, maybe. But we're going hard on the Fort McClellan cases just because they're not in here, and it will be interesting to see what that epidemiological study will turn up.
Well,
yeah.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening to us. And we would really appreciate it if you have questions, specific questions about the PACT Act, that you send them to us now so that we can look at them, look at the law, and give you our best guess for an answer for you or an absolute answer for you when we meet again next week. So thanks for being with us. Have a great day.